I never imagined that a quiet Saturday evening in my own dining room could turn into chaos so quickly. 1 second, I was admiring the soft glow of the candlelight on my mother's china, feeling a rare sense of contentment, and the next, a cold splash of martini hit my face. Vodka stung my eyes, and the olive drifted down onto my freshly pressed navy blue dress. My chest tightened with shock and disbelief, and for a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe or think. How had a simple dinner with my son Mark and his wife Jessica escalated into this? I could feel my heart racing as the initial wave of outrage mingled with confusion. Was this really happening in my own home? The kind of home where I had raised Mark, poured love into every corner, and tried to nurture harmony even when tension simmered quietly under the surface. As I wiped my eyes, trying to shake off the sting, flashes of the past few weeks came rushing back. The sudden windfall from my $2 million lottery win had changed everything, or so I thought. Mark had been unusually attentive, almost doting, calling to check on my plans, offering help, asking about my investments. At first, it had warmed me to see him so caring. But there was something about Jessica's involvement that had always made me uneasy. Her charm often came with a subtle edge, a way of measuring my worth and my choices. I'd brushed it aside, telling myself that maybe, just maybe, the money could mend old cracks between us, bring the family closer together. Yet here she stood, or rather, here she had lunged across the room with that martini, turning what should have been a celebratory evening into a scene of confrontation. I felt the anger build slowly, cold and precise, replacing my initial shock. My mind raced through the possibilities. Why now? Why tonight? What had been simmering behind those smiles and polite conversations? Every detail of their recent behavior. The lavish dinner plans, the sudden generosity, now seemed rehearsed, calculated, and full of hidden intent. And still, beneath the anger, there was a pang of hurt. This was my family, the people I had sacrificed for, nurtured, and trusted. That mix of betrayal and disbelief churned inside me, along with a burning curiosity. How had it come to this, and what would happen next? I took a deep breath, tasting the lingering vodka and brine, and braced myself. This was just the beginning of a story I hadn't expected to live, a story of love, betrayal, and choices that could change everything. I had to understand the why before I could respond, and I knew that to do so, I had to go back and trace the steps that led to this shocking moment. The evening stretched ahead of me like a puzzle waiting to be solved, and I had no choice but to start untangling it, piece by piece. Before the lottery changed everything, my life was a quiet rhythm of routines and small comforts, the kind that most people might overlook but that I had come to cherish. I had spent over 30 years teaching third graders, pouring my energy into guiding children who often seemed more like little mirrors of my own patience and persistence. My home in Clearwater was modest, but it reflected decades of care, neatly kept rooms, a tidy garden, and shelves lined with books and photographs that reminded me of the life I had built. Yet alongside these comforts, there was always a lingering sense of distance between me and my son Mark. A subtle tension that had grown over the years, especially since Jessica had entered our lives. I remember the little things, the way Mark's phone calls often felt transactional, polite but brief, never asking about my health or my plans unless prompted by Jessica's gentle insistence. Her influence was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, a constant measuring of my worth and opinions. I would find myself agreeing to things I wasn't sure about, smiling at remarks that carried an unspoken judgment, and then retreating into the quiet sanctuary of my routines. It was not bitterness I felt, but a quiet sorrow, a mild ache of being overlooked and undervalued in my own family. Sometimes I wondered if Mark even noticed, or if it had simply become background noise to him. Then the lottery ticket arrived, an unexpected twist that thrust me into a new world overnight. $2 million, a sum I had never imagined holding in my hands, transformed my daily life in subtle ways almost immediately. There was excitement. Yes, a sense of liberation, a promise of experiences and security I had only dreamed about. But there was also unease, a quiet wariness as I realized how money could alter not just my circumstances, but the dynamics I had long taken for granted. Mark became more attentive, calling frequently, asking about investments, about my plans for the money. And Jessica, usually detached, suddenly seemed interested in spending time, in offering opinions, in smiling in ways that felt rehearsed. I tried to remind myself that perhaps this was simply happiness at my good fortune, a chance for us to reconnect as a family. Yet deep down, a small, nagging part of me wondered if this attention was tied to something else, something less innocent. The way their glances lingered on my expressions, the slight tension behind their smiles, suggested a plan I could not yet see. I felt a mixture of hope and caution, wanting to believe in their love, but bracing for the subtle manipulations that had always been threaded through our interactions. As I polished the silverware and arranged the flowers in the vase that morning, I couldn't shake the sense that the calm of my home was about to be interrupted. This lottery win had opened a door, not just to wealth, but to questions, expectations, and possibilities I wasn't entirely prepared to face. And somewhere deep in my chest, I felt the faint stirrings of the storm that would soon arrive with Mark and Jessica at my doorstep, bringing both celebration and confrontation into the heart of my living room. The days leading up to that dinner were filled with small observations, sudden attention, unusual warmth, a subtle but unmistakable shift in behavior. I told myself I was imagining it, that this was simply excitement at my windfall. But even as I set the table and straightened the napkins, I could feel the tension under the surface, like a taut string waiting to snap. Little did I know, the evening would test every instinct I had about trust, family, and the cost of generosity. The evening of the dinner arrived with a strange mixture of excitement and unease that I could feel settling into my chest, like a weight I couldn't quite place. I had spent the morning putting final touches on my home, straightening the cushions on the sofa, arranging the flowers I had picked fresh from the garden, and ensuring the silverware gleamed just enough to reflect a sense of celebration without seeming overdone. My navy dress, modest yet elegant, hung carefully in my closet, waiting for me to slip it on. I wanted to look my best, not out of vanity, but as a way of honoring the moment, hoping that this dinner could be a bridge toward warmth and reconciliation with my son and his wife. When the doorbell rang precisely at 6, I felt my heart skip a beat. Mark stood there, carrying groceries and a few flowers, his usual casual demeanor replaced with something more attentive, almost reverent. And behind him, Jessica moved with an elegance and purpose I had rarely seen, holding a briefcase that immediately made me suspicious, though I pushed the thought aside. They had brought food, decorations, and a sense of formality that contrasted sharply with the casual dinners we used to have. Their smiles were brighter, their gestures more careful, and for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to feel that maybe, just maybe, they had genuinely wanted to celebrate with me. As we settled into the dining room, I observed the smallest details, the way Jessica adjusted the napkins just so, the way she complimented the china I had inherited from my grandmother. A recognition that felt unfamiliar, almost rehearsed. Mark spoke about my plans for the lottery winnings with a keen interest I hadn't seen in years, nodding at my ideas and offering suggestions that, on the surface, seemed thoughtful and supportive, but my instincts, honed over decades of navigating family dynamics, whispered caution. There was a precision to their movements, a timing to their remarks, that suggested planning rather than spontaneity. I found myself recalling moments from the past birthdays and holidays where their presence had been polite but distant, where Jessica's interest in my life had been minimal and Mark's attention fleeting. The contrast was stark, and a subtle tension began to creep beneath the surface of the evening's festivities. Each toast, each polite compliment, felt like a carefully measured step, a way of setting the stage for something I couldn't yet see. My curiosity battled with my unease, creating a cocktail of anticipation and suspicion that made the air in the room feel charged. Even as I laughed at memories I shared, noting the faint sparkle of their reactions, I could sense an underlying agenda. Jessica's gaze lingered a moment too long on my expression, as if calculating how I might respond. Mark's attentiveness, though flattering, carried a weight I hadn't felt before, an expectation that I could not yet name but felt pressing against me. I reminded myself to stay grounded, to observe carefully, to feel without yielding completely to the warmth they were presenting. By the time the first course was served, the tension had escalated subtly, threading through the conversation and my internal reflections like an invisible cord, tightening with each smile and compliment. I sipped my wine slowly, tasting its crispness while mentally preparing for the next steps of the evening, aware that the night held more than celebration. Somewhere between the polite laughter and the gentle clinking of glasses, the stage had been set. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the undercurrent of expectation, and the knowledge that soon the true purpose of this carefully orchestrated dinner would be revealed. And as the candles flickered, casting shadows across the table, I understood that this night would challenge not only my patience and judgment, but also the very foundation of trust I had held for my own family. Something was coming, and I could feel it in the tight line of Jessica's smile and the deliberate attentiveness in Mark's gestures, a confrontation waiting just beyond the surface, ready to upend the fragile balance of love, loyalty, and obligation. The moment it happened, time seemed to stretch in the strangest way. Jessica's arm had moved with an almost deliberate force, sending the martini spilling across my blouse and the edge of the table. I could feel the cold wetness soaking into the fabric, sharp and immediate, a jolt that pierced through the carefully maintained calm of the evening. Shock washed over me first, an involuntary intake of breath, followed almost instantly by a simmering anger that I had learned to control over decades. I studied her face, noting the flash of impatience and calculation behind the practiced smile. And in that instant, the scene crystallized. This was no accident, no emotional lapse. It was an assertion, a test, a demand disguised as confrontation. Mark hovered near, his movements too precise, his eyes flitting between us with a nervous intensity that spoke louder than any words could. I could recall the subtle shifts in his demeanor over the past few weeks, the sudden attentiveness, the careful politeness, the almost over-the-top interest in my plans for the lottery winnings. It all made sense now. Their attention had been a lure, a way of softening me, of making me underestimate the magnitude of their intentions. And yet, I felt a strange clarity, a sharpened focus that allowed me to observe without panic, to breathe while the room felt electrically charged with tension. I stepped back from the table, feeling the damp fabric against my skin, and allowed my mind to trace the path that had led to this moment. Memories surfaced: family dinners where requests had been veiled as suggestions, holidays where subtle guilt had been draped around my shoulders like a cloak, moments when I had quietly set aside my own discomfort to maintain appearances. I realized that these patterns were not mere quirks of family life. They were the groundwork for the moment that had just unfolded before me. And now, the stakes were different. This was not about etiquette or minor disagreements. It was about control, entitlement, and my own autonomy. I drew in a slow, deliberate breath, and in that pause, I assessed the documents that Mark had left conspicuously on the table: bills, financial plans, and insinuations of expectation. My fingers hovered above them as I processed the moral calculus that had guided my life. I had been raised to manage my resources wisely, to act with fairness, and to protect the boundaries of my independence. And now, faced with their demands, I understood that acquiescence would not simply reward them, it would compromise the principles I had lived by, and erode the very sense of self I had fought to maintain. As I looked at Jessica again, the smirk now replaced by a calculated neutrality, I realized the power of calm observation. Their gestures, rehearsed though they were, had given me insight. A small concession could satisfy immediate expectations while leaving me in control. My mind worked through the numbers, considering what to allow without yielding my dignity. This was not capitulation, it was strategy. The balance of power, though momentarily challenged, had shifted subtly under the weight of deliberate reasoning. By the time I spoke, or rather, when I allowed my intentions to be understood through action, I had resolved the equation in my head. The martini-stained blouse became a symbol not of humiliation, but of clarity. I could be polite, measured, and yet entirely unyielding in the ways that mattered. A small financial gesture, enough to signal acknowledgement without surrender, was placed carefully, deliberately, into the context of the evening. I could feel the surprise ripple across their faces, a flash of confusion that confirmed my reading of the room. I had anticipated their moves, and in doing so, had reasserted my own agency. As the dinner continued, my thoughts sharpened further. I catalogued each word, each glance, each calculated motion, building a mental map of intentions and responses. The tension remained, thick and almost palpable, but I no longer felt trapped within it. Instead, I had a clarity that allowed me to observe, respond, and anticipate. The confrontation had revealed much, but it had also illuminated the path forward, a delicate dance of principle, perception, and controlled concession. And I knew, deep within the rhythm of my own breathing, that this night had changed the dynamics forever, setting the stage for strategies yet to be enacted, and for the subtle yet firm reclamation of respect I had long deserved. I sat at my kitchen table, a quiet resolve settling over me like a familiar coat. The evening's chaos, Jessica's aggressive outburst, Mark's rehearsed insistence had left me unsettled, but not defeated. I could feel the tension in my shoulders ease slightly as I reached for my phone, a sense of control returning with each deliberate step I took. This was my money, my life, and I would not allow a moment of familial audacity to jeopardize it. I knew exactly who to call: first, my financial advisor, a steady presence in my life who had always understood the value of measured caution, and foresight. As I spoke, internally, I mapped out each potential threat and calculated every move. The conversation with my advisor was methodical, almost ritualistic, yet imbued with the satisfaction of regained authority. I outlined the evening's events, detailing Jessica's tantrum and Mark's carefully timed interventions. Each word I recounted reinforced my clarity, sharpening my mind and revealing the patterns of manipulation I had only suspected before. My advisor nodded, or at least I imagined their affirmation through the lens of my own confidence. And I began to see a path forward, the establishment of an irrevocable trust that would safeguard my $2 million lottery winnings from any untoward influence. The process of creating the trust was meticulous, almost meditative in its precision. I visualized every clause, every stipulation, every contingency designed to ensure that my assets remained beyond the reach of those who sought entitlement rather than earning. As I reviewed the necessary documents, I reflected on the emotional significance of this step. It was not just about money, but about autonomy, respect, and the lessons learned from years of subtle undermining and neglect. Every signed page, every notarized detail, felt like a brick reinforcing the foundation of my independence. Simultaneously, I contacted my attorney, transforming the vague sense of unease into concrete legal preparation. I documented every interaction with Mark and Jessica, the gestures, the words, the implied threats. In my mind, I cataloged each moment with forensic precision, aware that these records would serve as the scaffolding for any legal recourse if negotiations failed. I found a quiet satisfaction in this meticulousness, a reassurance that the chaos of the dinner could be converted into a strategic advantage. I imagined presenting these facts in a courtroom, not with emotion-driven reactions, but with calm authority that demanded recognition and respect. I planned contingencies, counteroffers, clearly defined boundaries, and preemptive responses to potential manipulations. Each decision reinforced my sense of empowerment, a remarkable shift from the vulnerability I had felt mere hours before. I considered how Mark and Jessica might react, and I derived a subtle pleasure from anticipating their surprise at my composure and preparedness. For the first time in a long while, I felt the full measure of control over my life, my finances, and the narrative they had tried to shape around me. By the time I concluded the calls and reviewed the trust documents once more, a profound clarity had settled in. The storm of that evening had been transformed into a strategic initiative. I was no longer reacting. I was commanding. The next chapter, the confrontation in a legal arena, would not be fueled by panic or anger, but by deliberate, confident action. Every step I had taken so far had positioned me to navigate the complexities of family betrayal with foresight, patience, and an unwavering sense of self. The stage was set, the pieces in place, and I was ready to reclaim not just my money, but my dignity. I stepped into the courtroom with a strange mixture of anxiety and calm, the air heavy with the faint scent of polished wood and paper. Facing Mark and Jessica here across the aisle from me, in the formal solemnity of a legal setting, felt surreal. They weren't just my family anymore. They were opposing forces, and I had prepared every detail to ensure I stood unshakable. As I arranged my documents on the table before me, I reminded myself to breathe, to let every page I'd meticulously prepared speak louder than any words I might stumble over. The judge entered, carrying an aura of authority that immediately shifted the energy in the room. I watched Mark fidget subtly, glancing at Jessica, who was trying, unsuccessfully, to maintain a composed exterior. Their discomfort was almost satisfying, a reflection of the thorough preparation and clear evidence I had assembled. Each file I placed before me represented not just numbers or contracts, but a record of my foresight and a safeguard against manipulation. I could almost see their earlier attempts at entitlement crumble silently in their minds, a contrast to my own serene confidence. As the proceedings began, I found myself reflecting on the journey that brought me here, the martini incident, the veiled demands, and the long nights spent thinking through each potential misstep. Now, in the courtroom's stillness, those memories sharpened my resolve. I observed the subtle reactions of the opposing counsel, the fleeting glance of doubt in Jessica's eyes, and the tension in Mark's jaw. It was almost cinematic, the tension palpable, yet controlled entirely by the strength of preparation and clarity of purpose. The presentation of documentation unfolded methodically. I watched the judge review each page, the detailed trust agreements, the records of interactions, the careful notes of every confrontation. Each nod or pause reinforced my sense of authority, of being in command of both the facts and the narrative. I reminded myself that justice here was not abstract. It was tangible, encoded in every signature, every verified detail, every piece of evidence that confirmed my autonomy and protected my assets. There were brief moments of tension as challenges arose, but I remained calm, responding internally with the precision I had rehearsed. I analyzed each question, each implication, and each fleeting attempt at intimidation, neutralizing them mentally before they could gain traction. The courtroom seemed to contract around us, every glance and gesture magnified. Yet I was steady, anchored by the certainty of preparation. Finally, as the judge dismissed the frivolous claims, a profound sense of satisfaction washed over me. Relief, vindication, and a quiet triumph mingled inside, a powerful reminder of the strength in foresight and steadfastness. The tension that had built over months through betrayal, manipulation, and uncertainty collapsed into clarity. I could see Mark and Jessica absorbing the reality that their schemes had failed, their earlier confidence replaced by unease and silent acknowledgement of my strategic advantage. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt lighter, empowered, and fully in control. This wasn't merely a legal victory, it was a reaffirmation of autonomy, careful planning, and the ability to navigate complex family dynamics with dignity. I knew the coming days would bring reflection and recalibration for everyone involved. But for me, this moment crystallized a truth I had long held. Careful preparation and calm resolve can transform chaos into triumph, even when facing those closest to you. Sitting quietly in my sunlit living room, I let the calm settle around me, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of the past weeks. The courtroom battles, the tension with Mark and Jessica, and the careful navigation of legal strategies had left me exhausted, yet profoundly empowered. I realized that the true victory wasn't just the protection of my $2 million winnings, it was reclaiming my sense of agency and boundaries within my family. For the first time in years, I felt a freedom that wasn't tied to money or obligation, but to clarity of purpose and self-respect. As I reflected on everything that had transpired, memories of the strained dinners, subtle manipulations, and the shocking martini incident came and went, like echoes in a room I was now able to walk through with ease. I understood more clearly the patterns that had allowed others to take liberties with my trust and generosity. But rather than dwelling on resentment, I focused on the lessons learned, the importance of firm boundaries, discernment in relationships, and the courage to assert one's rights without fear. This clarity led me to a new purpose. I began channeling my experiences into creating a small financial literacy foundation, aimed at helping individuals navigate sudden wealth and protect themselves from exploitation. The process of planning and mentoring others brought a renewed sense of joy and fulfillment, turning a painful chapter into something constructive and empowering. I found satisfaction not only in securing my own future, but in providing guidance so others could avoid the pitfalls I had faced. Walking through my garden in the late afternoon, I savored the simple pleasures: the rustle of leaves, the warm sunlight, the quiet hum of life continuing uninterrupted. I allowed myself to dream again, to envision future travels, personal projects, and meaningful connections unmarred by expectation or manipulation. The freedom I felt was profound, the lessons indelibly etched into my approach to family, money, and personal integrity. I realized that true empowerment isn't about wealth alone. It's about knowing your worth, standing firm in your principles, and creating life on your own terms. As I sipped my tea and watched the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a deep gratitude for the journey, the challenges that tested me, and the wisdom I had gained. For anyone listening, perhaps the reminder is clear: protect your boundaries, recognize the value of your autonomy, and never underestimate the quiet strength that comes from careful thought and steadfast action. Life will always present challenges, but with reflection and courage, we can turn even the most difficult moments into sources of empowerment and clarity.